Downtown Woodstock, Georgia, early on a Thursday evening. On and around Main Street, things are hopping. There's Truck and Tap, which has flung open its garage door entrance to the spring weather for folks getting an early start to their weekend. Around the corner, there's Reformation Brewery, where neighbors are gathering with their dogs and their beers beneath the giant oak tree that's been there for decades. Across the street, there's Dominic's Pizza food truck. Oh, and some 19 other spots to eat and drink, along with cute stores. And let's not forget the Northside Hospital Cherokee Amphitheater down the street, which is dotted with dog walkers and kids, as tonight it's not hosting one of its free live shows. No doubt about it, downtown Woodstock is a destination for people from miles around. 20 years ago, these same blocks sounded more like this.
What it was when they started redeveloping was mostly woods and a couple, older houses.
That's Brian Stockton, Woodstock's economic development chief. When it happened, the redevelopment that turned that stand of woods and a few houses around some railroad tracks in the suburban city into the walkable retail, restaurant, housing destination that's here today, it was kind of astonishing.
Back then, it was a huge surprise. Yeah, you didn't really see this investment happening in any of the downtowns.
So how did it come to be that Woodstock, a suburb a full 30 miles north of the city of Atlanta, set the precedent for what would become an explosive trend in suburban and in-town neighborhoods alike? This is What's Next ATL, powered by the Atlanta Regional Commission, where we explore the big new ideas shaping Metro Atlanta. I'm Kate Sweeney. And today, we continue our look at how to build the communities we want by looking at the story of one small city that surprised everyone when it rejected the way things had been done for years to try something new. We'll find out how it came to be and what other communities can do to bring about similar change, along with what they should never do. That's coming up. Brian Stockton didn't get his start as Woodstock's economic development director till a few years after the city's dramatic transformation began. But he knows the story. Everyone here does.
You had, 100-plus acre developments that were coming in and being annexed into the city, some commercial areas, 2 golf courses. So you had kind of that typical suburban sprawl.
Back in the 1990s, Woodstock looked the same as a lot of suburban communities. There were acres of single-family residential housing, some drive-to commercial strips, a great Waffle House. I know this because my sister and her family lived here at the time. And I remember visiting. Woodstock was quiet, but it wasn't sleepy.
In the 90s, I think our population was around 8,000 people, and by 2003 or 4, it was 20,000 people. So there was a huge growth in a short amount of time.
On the edge of all that growth was this old, mostly unused downtown area.
3 blocks of older buildings that have been here since the early 1900s that had some retail, some service-type businesses in it. Other than that, there wasn't really much around. So that's where you started seeing kind of that residential suburban development encroaching into the area.
City leaders wanted to stop that encroachment, to try something different. A walkable downtown. They applied for and got something called an LCI planning grant from the Atlanta Regional Commission. LCI stands for Livable Centers Initiative. It's this program that incentivizes Metro ATL jurisdictions to re-envision their communities as vibrant, walkable places, encouraging less dependence on cars. Which is basically what Woodstock's plan imagined, a total redo of downtown that brought it back into the fabric of the community. This included a revitalized town center, an improved system of bike ped trails, and all of it walkable. The kinds of things you typically hear about these days in plans like this. At the time, a project like this one, though, it was kind of unheard of. No one around Woodstock expected a departure like the one its leaders were envisioning, and that included the city council. And so, in an effort to get them to understand, project developers actually bussed Woodstock City Council members out to Vickery Village, an early live-work-play development in Cumming, Georgia.
And when they came back, they had understood what it was, and it was passed unanimously at that point.
City leaders just needed to experience a revitalized space like this in order to appreciate it. And in a way, the rest, as they say, is history. So that's the what, as in what happened. But the how, as in how did they really do it? And what can I do to get this kind of redevelopment in my neighborhood, is a whole different story. And that's what we'll start to explore after the break. Stay with us. Hey there. Last week, we thought about the future. Hey, let's get some music going here. Ooh, that's better. Last week, we thought about the future, like 30 years into the future. And we asked you this: if you could take a time machine to the year 2050, what would you hope to see very first thing when you step out of that DeLorean, the dry ice rising around you? Here's what you said. 67% of you said you'd like to see better transit, bike lanes, and sidewalks. 13% of you said you'd like to see a diversity of residents. 7% of you said you'd like to see more trees. And that leaves 13% of you who said you just hope to see a Waffle House. New week, new question. As we talk about building the cities and neighborhoods we want, what is one thing you'd like to improve about your neighborhood? You can tell us on the page for this episode at whatsnextatl.org/podcast. We'll fill you in on the results next episode. We're back. Okay, we've established that since 1990, the city of Woodstock has transformed its downtown from a set of quiet railroad tracks into a northern mecca for community life. But the matter of how they got from point A to point B is a whole other question. One answer has to do with a type of zoning overlay. Yes, listener, you heard me, zoning overlay. Stay with me here. I promise this journey is worth it. See, in our downtowns today, we like to do things like walk to craft breweries or, say, kombucha breweries for those who don't imbibe alcohol. But you couldn't always just build those things right next to your townhouses.
And that really changed from that Euclidean zoning to what's called form-based zoning.
Okay, what are those two things?
So Euclidean is based on uses, right? So you're going to have your commercial things over here, your industrial things over here, and your residential things here.
All far away from one another. Euclidean zoning meant you'd have to get in your car and drive from your house to the drugstore. You couldn't just stroll across the street because a drugstore, which is retail, wasn't allowed in residentially zoned spaces. And you definitely need to get into your car and drive a ways to reach any place where manufacturing was taking place. Enter form-based zoning, a different thing altogether.
Form-based is not really so based on uses, but based on what things look like and how they feel and how people interact with them. In the early 2000s, a brewery would have been a manufacturing facility, but now every downtown is getting a brewery.
So if you're gonna allow breweries, since everyone wants to walk to them, and let's face it, walking home from a brewery is safer than driving anyway, you just need to make sure your downtown breweries are, well, attractive, with street-level appeal, just like your coffee shops and restaurants. So now, with form-based zoning, Woodstock actually encourages some manufacturers, like breweries, to build downtown. They just need to follow certain rules in terms of their appearance and how they operate.
And so that gets that human interaction that you're looking for in a central business district, but allows, a use that typically you'd push out to an industrial park or kind of the outskirts of town.
Wow. That's something I've never thought of as somebody who goes around and thinks like, oh yeah, it's fun to walk to a brewery, but I certainly wasn't doing that 10, 15 years ago.
No.
So next time you're hanging out in your local brewery, consider raising a pint to zoning. There's a lot more that downtown Woodstock reveals about how to build the communities we want. But in order to see it, we really have to get outside.
So we're walking to downtown.
And I just want to speak to the fact, because people can't see this, I don't know if we could have chosen a prettier day to walk around downtown Woodstock.
That's for sure.
The birds are singing, the sun is shining. It's this perfect breezy 75 degrees as we stroll past a mixture of townhouses, condos, and single-family houses behind the main commercial strip. It's a very different mix from the traditional single-family house neighborhoods that suburban communities like Woodstock are known for. What's the advantage of having a variety of different kinds of housing all kind of nearby?
I think it invites all kinds of different people. Like you see, we have a lot of empty nesters, but they're not having to do yard maintenance. So they have all these pocket parks, and they have a big park in the middle and stuff like that. So they're the ones that really get out and they use those pocket parks or the community to really hang out in as their community center.
According to a 2018 Pew Research Center report, suburban counties have experienced the sharpest increases in the number of older adults since 2000, more than rural and more than urban areas. There's an interesting story to tell with demographic trends like that one, and we'll explore that even more in our next episode. For now, we drift past Thursday evening residents getting their early weekend on, back to the trails that will eventually join a system that connects with the Atlanta Beltline and the Silver Comet Trail. This whole scene feels like it grew organically over many decades rather than just a few years. Maybe that's because it harkens back to life in cities and small towns alike before that use-based Euclidean zoning took hold. And one reason it all works and feels this way, says Brian Stockton, is that Woodstock's redevelopment doesn't bow to the 20th century inclination toward car-centric culture. He says that when other communities come to him for counsel now on how to do redevelopments, this is the major thing he cautions them on.
The pitfalls I think you're going to see are people kind of succumbing to the pressure of providing parking, and so that is sort of the antithesis to good urban development or good pedestrian activity. So you sort of have to change the discussion and the mentality of, I'm not going to pull up next to the burger joint I want to go to and expect to get a front row spot, but I may have to walk, 5 minutes.
And I would say also, one thing I do see in Woodstock is that the downtown is, it's connected to everything around it. It's not just sort of like an isolated development. You hear this term drive to urbanism.
Right. Yeah, I've visited a lot of, new urban developments that are out in the middle of nowhere, and they all have commercial components and they're all great based on the principles of those type of developments. And you go there and the commercial stuff is struggling, which is where we're a little different. Is we built off of an already existing downtown and just expanded that. And so you have that good mix of commercial and housing now.
Woodstock did something smart in planning its revival. It didn't try to invent something completely new. Instead, it brought the bones of what was already there, a centrally located downtown, into its planning. Brian Stockton isn't claiming things are perfect. In the years to come, Woodstock hopes to attract more homegrown businesses to its downtown by increasing office space. These days, many residents still get behind the wheel to commute to nearby communities for work each day. They also want to expand the trail system and implement a grid street network to spread the pleasant pedestrian vibe beyond downtown. These are not minor plans. So I'll ask you, how do you take on a really large vision without getting overwhelmed?
Yeah, long-range planning, to me, it really has to be visited and changed every few years. One of the first projects I worked on was the 2020 comprehensive plan that we adopted in 2008, and then you come in 4 years later and most of it doesn't apply. So, because either trends have changed, demographics have changed, the way people want to live have changed, all of those things. So
it's really a moving target.
It really is a moving target, and you have to be able to adapt sort of the needs of the community. Like we're about to build shipping container bathrooms at our trailhead, and never would I have thought that we'd be looking at building things in shipping containers first ever anywhere, and second, that Woodstock would be supportive of shipping container bathrooms.
So, Woodstock is a suburban community. It's 30 miles from Atlanta, and this dynamic, connected downtown was a pretty pioneering move. What do you think it was about Woodstock that made it happen here? Because, you'd think almost like it would be the opposite, like not in Woodstock.
Yeah, I think you had the perfect storm. I don't think we'll ever be able to replicate what happened, and the perfect storm really to me was them visioning the plan, adopting the plan, and having a very willing and able developer come in and sort of set the plan in motion. But it just all sort of came to be in 2004.
And as a result, he says, the town's very dynamic is changing.
So now we have young people who, went to Woodstock High School and said, I never want to come back to Woodstock. And they, go off to college, and then they come back and they're like, oh, this transformation happened, and now I'm going to come back and open a business here. You don't have to go far outside that downtown area to find affordable housing. Those have been pretty cool success stories to see those kids come back and open their business in their hometown that they wanted to get away from.
That's Brian Stockton, Economic Development Director for Woodstock, Georgia. Once Woodstock started doing its thing, along with in-town developments like Atlantic Station, walkable downtowns spread like wildfire across Metro Atlanta and really across the country. Next episode, we look at why.
I mean, the baby boomers are the generation who the suburbs were built for. And they're just hitting the point where even a lot of the boomers are starting to question if this is really quite what I want now.
We'll talk with Georgia Tech professor Ellen Dunham-Jones about how the history of the suburbs is tied directly with the mad dash for redevelopment that we're seeing now, both OTP and in town. We'll also talk about how housing affordability fits into this equation and the link between the growing influence of tech and our quest for a sense of authenticity. It's a great conversation. In the meantime, if you're interested in a deeper, nerdier dive into the kind of planning that Woodstock and other Metro Atlanta communities have done to create their walkable, livable communities, there's more about ARC's Livable Centers initiative on the page for this episode. That's at whatsnextatl.org/podcast. That's where you can also answer this week's quiz question. What is one thing you'd like to improve about your neighborhood? If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe and tell friends. Don't forget to review and rate us on Apple's podcast player. And thanks. See you next time.
Blackness isn't just about race. I'm Deneen Milner, and I'm a New York Times bestselling author. On my podcast, Speakeasy with Deneen, I dive into the beauty and humanity of Blackness with people like writer Tayari Jones, journalist Demetria Lucas, and rapper Killer Mike. Listen to Speakeasy with Deneen from Georgia Public Broadcasting. Subscribe for free at gpb.org/podcasts or on your favorite podcast app.